can't do too little. Unfortunately. Can I take this? You don't need to throw stuff in. No, it's not like this much. Still ask for me.
basically the allegation code that two extra federal affairs that the acting IG knew about, and that's what she's being related to. Who asked questions last? Okay. Hearing will reconvene. We now recognize the gentleman from Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Issa, I'd like to thank you, and Chairman Micah, and Ranking Member Cummins for having what I consider pretty important meetings and trying to have the most efficient government as possible. Mr. Edwards, good seeing you again, sir. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for coming here today. I know it's been a tough day. Appreciate you coming. But the bottom line is we try to get an efficient government as best we can. And one of the things we're all concerned with is right now the national debt just ticked up over $15.7 trillion today. So it was 15.6 for the last couple of weeks, and it's rapidly increasing. We're just trying to bring down government costs and spending. Matter of fact, one of the proposals I've actually submitted is, which we have on a U-Cut, and if you're interested, go to the website and take a look more at it, but it's addressing this issue in itself and making sure that, some of the baggage equipment, the screening devices we've had, we've had over 600, I believe, and we've got to get rid of them. We've got to move them on and hopefully get some kind of reimbursement out of it at the same time. Under my proposal, the Federal Government could save about $20 million in storage costs. I mean, that's pretty significant. And any proceeds in selling the excess equipment also could be used in savings. So, we're trying on our part to make it as efficient as possible. In the investigations and some of the things we're trying to cut, committee investigators discovered that 85% of major transportation security equipment currently warehoused are stored for longer than 6 months, and there's 35% of the equipment has been stored for more than 1 year. One piece of equipment has been stored for more than 6 years, and that's 60% of its total useful life. Mr. Nicholson, I know you've been involved in quite a lot of this, but why is $184 million worth of screening equipment with an annual leasing cost of more than $3.5 million that are used that are in the security in the warehouse in Dallas? Could you kind of tell us why that is?
Yes, sir. The inventory varies a little bit, as I mentioned. I think that was probably, it sounds like that inventory might have been a January, February time. We're 155 and we're under 150 now, I think, in inventory. But when you look at from the perspective of 95% of the value of our security equipment is in the field and in the airports. And at the same time, I mentioned in my statement that 85% of the equipment is out in the airports, and 15 in the warehouse. What that tells me when I look at my monthly reports that I get on the status of the inventory is that we do have our most expensive, which we generally think of as our most impacting technology, is deployed. So it still is a lot of material. Those warehouses are about a little over 400,000 square feet, so they are big warehouses. But when you put it in the context of what percent of the value is in that warehouse, and that is our only transportation security equipment warehouse, and what the value is of those items that are in the warehouse, I think that gives context to the operation.
I'm assuming, sir, that you do have a plan to dispose of this equipment?
Yes, sir, we do, and our next disposal is scheduled for June, early June or late May, and I think we're at about 1,000 pieces of equipment already, and there'll be more that will be coming up to that point. But we have each year, as part of our financial audit, we have 2 wall-to-wall inventories. So we capture and reconcile all of the inventory in that. And in the past few years, because of several of the concerns that the IG had as part of doing that, they would accompany and observe the inventory, one that we did in the June time frame, one that we did just before the close of the fiscal year, usually the last week in September, the last 2 weeks in September. the progress that we've made in reconciling, identifying, coding, addressing all of those things that have found wrong, this year TSA will do its June inventory by itself, and we will be joined in the September time frame for the final inventory. That's largely the result of last year when we did the sample size for the value of the inventory at the time. We had 100% success in identifying every piece of equipment, its condition code, and where it was in the warehouse.
Well, I've got 14 seconds left, so with that, sir, I will yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll recognize myself for a second round. I apologize that voting tends to have this effect. Mr. Nicholson, what do you say to the fact that you buy more pieces of equipment than you have identified locations for? In other words, you make purchases of equipment, commitments to purchase, and to take delivery prior to figuring out what airport they would or could go for. And when asked, the answer that we got was, well, it was a good buy. We made a larger buy because we get a better price. Is that a sound way to do planning?
Sir, I think it depends upon the piece of equipment as far as the specific location. And I say that because each year as part of the appropriations process, we provide a list of all of the projects that we're going to do and all of the equipment. And before we execute any of the monies or purchases on that equipment, we have to identify number of units and the projects that they would go to.
Well, let me just follow up then. If I hear you right, what you're saying is the appropriation project or process drives bad purchasing systems because you buy based on what you can justify in appropriations, more or less.
No, sir, that's not.
Okay, then why did the appropriation process work there at all?
I think that the appropriations process has worked in that case.
Well, you bought more than you had identified a use for. You bought more than you needed. In some cases, the stuff never actually went to the field before it became obsolete. So what caused that to happen?
I think in some cases there were advancements in some technology. So when the question that I was previously answering would get to things like explosive trace detection equipments. Those are several, there are several thousand pieces of those equipment that serve our baggage screening process as well as the passenger or carry-on baggage process. We don't always know the exact locations, or we won't buy with a specific location for each piece of equipment, but we do have a forecast of when the service life of that equipment would be would reach its completion. So we would buy a quantity for that and later determine which airport those specific pieces of equipment.
Mr. Edwards, as you did your investigation, did you find that these were reasonable assessments of excess volume, or that in fact in some cases long after they arrived, even 2 years after, they hadn't identified where they would go?
Thank you, Chairman. We started the audit mainly because the plant, property, and equipment material weaknesses was reported in the 2008 financial statement. We look back in 2010 and 2011, those material weaknesses still exist. Well, the first thing is you need to have a transition plan, and you have a procedure and policy. You got to have that, and then you need to go back and see if this is actually working. You know, you need to have, for new equipment, a strategy and a deployment plan for that. And then for redeployment, if you're taking some from a CAT exit airport, you know, can that be used at a smaller airport? You know, how often are you going to review that? And then there should be a limit on how long something stays in storage. You know, those things need to be taken into consideration.
I appreciate that. Mr. Lord, you haven't been asked nearly enough questions, and this one may be a little bit outside of your preparation, but because we know that we count on the GAO to get answers for questions that somebody on a panel doesn't yet have. As we reviewed in preparation for today's hearing, we discovered kind of an anomaly. Some of the money for TSA, of course, comes from regular appropriation. Some comes from fees. When they purchase excess equipment and then and then dispose of it, but dispose of it in many cases to other, quote, agencies, are we in fact leaving if you will, a back door of excess purchases that then, or slightly out of date, new technologies that have come on, when they end up not being destroyed because they are, quote, out of service, but rather passed on to other governments, do we create essentially a backdoor appropriation if some of that money comes from user fees? And by the way, are we wasting user fees by allowing excess purchasing?
Those are very difficult questions. I'm not prepared to answer.
That's why we give them the GAO.
And if I understand your question correctly, you're asking whether that poses an Anti-Deficiency Act issue where you're spending in excess of your appropriation. I would have to look at that. It's clear they're disposing of the equipment and perhaps receiving revenues. So the question is that consistent with relevant appropriation law? I'm not prepared to ask that today, but it's a great question.
Well, Mr. Edwards, if you were to, we recently had a cabinet officer who gave a grade to himself in this committee. So I'll ask not the individual, but you as the most direct overseer. If you had to give, for logistics management and control, if you had to give TSA a grade, 2008 and today, what grades would you give them for each of those reporting periods?
Well, TSA has made some improvements, but there's still a lot of work still left.
So D to a C minus?
Somewhere in that range.
Well, I want to thank you for your patience here today. Mr. Edwards, I will tell you that our staff does intend to follow up with the details of their visit, timelines, and at least a synopsis of what employees at the plant told them that led us to believe that, in fact, it was not an ordinary disposal, that people were brought in early specifically to get it out, and that our people were delayed so that the number on the previously given inventory would come much closer to the number that was going to be present, but certainly not the number at the time that they had it. And we'd appreciate your following up to get the facts because we want to be accurate.
Yes, sir, absolutely. As soon as I get the information, I will
Thank you.
report back.
With that, we stand adjourned. Oops, wait. Oh, I'm sorry. No, if you want a second round, go ahead. Please, the gentleman is recognized. Don't get your hat on yet, my mother would say.
Mr. Lord, I was just going to ask you in regards to what, some of the history, like the puffers, they didn't work, and what can we do to make sure that we don't have that type of problem again in regards to redesign some of the equipment that we have now, making sure that it works to what we need it to do, things like that. Could you kind of elaborate on that?
Sure. These are some of the same issues I discussed in my written statement. I think it's really important to clearly define your requirements up front. What do you actually need? And not only get agreement within the component, but at the higher level, within the department in the acquisition group that's responsible for overseeing everything. You also, even though DHS has done a good job in updating the requirements, issuing new rules, you also want them to be aggressive in conducting oversight, making sure people follow the rules, so to speak. So at the department level, you need that to occur. And at the component level, as some of the examples suggest in my testimony today, you need the components, TSA, other groups within the department to provide timely information to the people trying to conduct oversight. And there's been a breakdown in the process. So you need good flows of information up, you need good flows down, you need clear roles, and you need someone, responsible for conducting oversight and enforcing the rules. So it's a very complicated process. That's probably the simplest way I could explain it.
Yeah, it's complicated but important, making sure that we use very efficiently the hard-earned taxpayer dollar, which I know you're vigilant of. But has the TSA developed a plan for identifying how it will approach the upgrades from currently deployed explosive detection systems?
For the EDS, that was a recommendation we made in our July 2011 report. We were concerned about that. They not only have this large fleet of machines on the floor, so to speak, but they're buying new machines, and we didn't see a clear plan for ensuring not only the new stuff, but the old machines were going to both be capable of meeting the new requirements. During the process, they also enhanced their explosive detection requirements, which poses a very complex problem, but we think, they needed to conduct better planning to ensure they will, in fact, meet those requirements.
So the TSA does have a plan?
We're currently conducting follow-up on that report, and they agreed with our recommendation. They're moving out smartly to develop such a plan, but we haven't signed off on it yet.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate the information today, and I'll yield back, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I want to thank all of you for your attendance and participation today, and we stand adjourned.